La FILIT 2024 am vorbit cu scriitoarea britanică născută în Bulgaria, Kapka Kassabova, despre Frontiera, o călătorie la marginea Europei. O carte fenomen, un excelent reportaj literar, au spus la unison critica și cititorii din peste cele 20 de țări unde a fost tradusă. Pentru a scrie Frontiera, Kapka Kassabova a călătorit vreme de 2 ani de-a lungul granițelor Bulgariei cu Turcia și Grecia. A traversat coasta Mării Negre, munții Stranșa și Rodopii, trecând în continuu de o parte și de alta frontierelor. A întâlnit oameni și le-a ascultat poveștile. Localnici, grăniceri, refugiați din Orientul Mijlociu, contrabandiști, cei care în vremea cortinei de fier au încercat să treacă ilegal granița în afara blocului comunist. Musulmani și creștini, bulgari, greci, turci și pomaci ne spun o altă istorie a Balcanilor decât cea oficială. Autentică, mereu dureroasă și prin scriitura Kapkei Kassabova aproape poetică.
We meet in a very cozy place, Kapka. Great coffee, great tea, but the greatest thing is that I'm having tea with you. We will talk about your book tonight, Frontiera, o călătorie către capătul Europei. This is how the title sounds in Romanian. This is the first of what you beautifully described as the Balkan Quartet, which includes To the Lake, Elixir and Anima also. These are all referred to sometimes as travel books, but I'm not quite sure that they are travel books. How do you respond to this label? Are you a travel writer?
Well, you know, labels are funny things.
They are.
I think labels say usually more about the person doing the labeling than the thing that is being labeled. So there is confusion between place and travel. And to me they are very different things, because you can be in a place and write from that place, not even about, but from that place, without traveling. That's as far as it goes, but really these are books about being human. That's what they are.
You were born in Bulgaria, then moved shortly into Great Britain, then you lived for a period of your life in New Zealand, and now you live in Scotland, and it's from there that you embarked on this journey to the edge of Europe. Why did you want to undergo this quest, and why this specific patch of land, the border zones where Bulgaria, Greece and Turkey meet?
Well, it's a very particular patch of land. It's actually quite a large area we are talking about here. It's part of the old Iron Curtain. And the edge of Europe, it's, again, who knows where the edge of Europe is? It's, you know, it's a relative thing. But it is a kind of gateway to something. You know, it is a confluence of continents. And so it's a very interesting place for several reasons, starting with the personal reasons why I went there. It's because I grew up behind the Iron Curtain. You know, my generation, I was born in 1973. My generation of children were the last ones here to grow up behind the Iron Curtain. And it marked us, you know, living behind a border like that. So I always wanted to explore that in some way. And because I'm a writer of place, it had to be through specific places and people, because a place is nothing without, you know, its residents, without its people. And, you know, I'm a people's writer. Although I write about nature a lot, it is always, you know, through the human experience. So I went back to my border, you know, to see what's left of it, what's left of the Iron Curtain, literally on the ground. It's not very interesting, what's left of it, because it's not much that's left of it on the ground. It's been recycled. Most of it has been recycled by locals, you know, for something more useful. That's what happens to borders. They get recycled, they fall eventually. You know, they destroy our lives first, deadly borders like this, and then they suddenly become the past. They fall away into the past and become recycled on the scrap heap of history. But what's left is the legacy. of the border in people's minds and people's hearts.
Most of your stories, many of your stories, are about what happened during the Cold War, when a lot of people either died or were arrested as they were trying to escape the communist bloc through Bulgaria. What did you find on field more than you already knew from the official history about the escape tourism? And could you expand on this expression, escape tourism?
Yeah. I don't know, I think the younger people here probably don't know about this, or maybe know about this as history. It's part of recent history. But yeah, I suppose the escape tourists were, during communism, during the Cold War, were people who came to Bulgaria from all over Eastern Europe, including Romania, who came ostensibly on holiday, usually to the beaches, the Black Sea beaches, and then made an attempt to cross into the border, into Turkey or Greece, which was the west, even though it's actually the southeast, but we're talking politically, not geographically here. So these attempts usually ended in death. They were usually killed or arrested, with something like, I don't know, 5% of successful escapes. And most of the successful escapes were Bulgarians who knew the
Roots.
And the routes are actually quite well established. They are old routes, and they continue to be used by refugees, people who try to cross the border the other way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. As you read the book, you think that this is about a border that was deadly at a certain time in history, but then you get to the stories of the refugees coming from the Middle East, and you realize that this is still a deadly border.
Yes, it is still a deadly border. You know, it's safe for some and unsafe for others. And, you know, borders have this obvious duality, you know, us and them, black and white, this side and the other side. And that's where the death comes from, and that's where the, you know, duality creates conflict. On the other hand, a border zone is actually like a labyrinth, you know, it's a place where many different things meet. Especially that border zone, because it's 3 countries meet there, you know, hundreds and thousands of years of history, and quite interesting ecosystems. You know, there's 2 major mountain ranges in the book, which are partly explored, because they are within that kind of border zone. There is the Black Sea coast as well. So it's a kind of, yeah, it's a labyrinth. It's a hall of mirrors, full of paradoxes and full of ambivalence. The border is an ambivalence place. It's not just black and white. Politically, it is black and white. But from a psychological and kind of human point of view, what happens is quite complex. Especially if you live there.
You mentioned exploring the mountains. You had to face quite a difficult terrain. What was it for you to explore, to travel through this terrain?
Well, it was frightening because, well, let me perhaps set the scene of this terrain. Mm-hmm. It's the border that I explored, the border region is kind of, it passes through some pretty wild places. It passes through 2 major mountain ranges, which are of course shared by 2 or 3 countries of the border, Bulgaria, Greece and Turkey. And one of these mountain ranges is Stranja, possibly the most mysterious and sort of little known mountain in the Balkans. I'm not sure, certainly it was, I found it quite mysterious, and it's a strange place. It's an extraordinary place. There are still traces from the Thracians, from the ancient Thracians there. And it starts on the Black Sea coast. and has two mirror sides, the Bulgarian and the Turkish side. And the other mountain range is the Rhodope Mountains, which is a vast mountain range. It's like a small country. So in this book, I only explored a small part of it.
Did you travel by car, by foot?
I drove,
You drove.
and when I couldn't drive, I walked. And of course, the really remote places in the border forest, you can't drive. The roads end. The roads have been destroyed by the military on both sides. So you kind of just reach a dead end. It's history's dead end. But from a natural and ecological point of view, actually these places are some of the most sort of biodiverse places.
Pristine, maybe?
Almost, yeah, at least kind of relatively preserved. So there is, for example, this forest, perhaps the most frightening and maybe symbolic experience that I had of the border happened with Zico, who was a former human trafficker.
Smuggler.
Smuggler. Yeah, smuggler is a better word. A smuggler of everything. People, hunting dogs, I don't know, antiquities dug up by treasure hunters, mushrooms, just whatever is there. You know, it's depending on the sort of terrain, and this terrain has all sorts of goods to be smuggled. So he used to smuggle things and people from Bulgaria into Greece. And Zico is a key character in this because he is the border. You know, he's a child of the border. He's my age. He grew up in the shadow of this border. And this is on the Bulgarian side in a small Pomak community, and the Pomaks are the Bulgarian Muslims. So he and I crossed the border together into Greece, and it sort of became this kind of, you know, out of control sort of adventure that turned into a misadventure. But that is what happens on that border, and that is what happens in the forest. And this forest is between Bulgaria and Greece is kind of full of trees which have initials carved into them, and they are the initials of several generations of fugitives, people who tried to cross, dating back to the Greek Civil War, actually, and then after that, during the Cold War. So you see initials in Greek and in Bulgarian. And it's a haunted forest. You know, the trees are like people. And it's vast. We're talking, you know, I don't know, 30, 40 kilometers of just nobody and nothing. You know, the villages are empty. They're border villages. So this is the terrain, you know, where Zico and I were kind of going to visit a monastery, which never happened. Zico being a border character, you know, a border person, was very slippery, and I was completely out of my element there, as everyone is out of their element there, except Zico and the bears. And and after Zico, you know, after we parted in a very kind of border-like way, we went our separate ways. I met a woman on the Greek side who is a forest ranger, and I call her the goddess of the forest. And there is one chapter which is her story, how she came to be there. And I had a different kind of experience with her. And I saw different things through her eyes than with Zico. So this is what I mean when I say that the border is a labyrinth. That even though there are very few people left in these border places, they all have a relationship with the border and its forests and its animals and its people and its history. So it's endless.
How long did it take for you to complete the journey, and at what point did your journey become literature? Did you write as you traveled?
Well, it's, you know, I have several types of research that I do almost in parallel. I have research on the ground, which is when I live there for a time. usually quite a long time, you know, months. That's why it's not travel. And then I do all the reading, and then I do some of the writing, and then I return physically to some of these places to finish, you know, finish the work. And at one point I remember thinking, this is an endless journey, potentially. You know, I could spend 20 years on this. If I was an academic researching the border, that would be my career sorted for 20 years. You know, I would just keep researching it, and there's always more. But I realized, you know, everything has a beginning, a middle, and an end when you're a storyteller. And it had to end somewhere. I had to stop because I became obsessed, you know. And I think if you are creating something like this, and everyone here who is a creator knows that you have to become obsessed. And sometimes it tips into kind of, yeah, perhaps, yeah, a total obsession. But you have to, that's the price you pay. That's the sacrifice. You have to actually live inside it. And it's wonderful to disappear into what you are pursuing, to completely disappear into it. That's nirvana, you know? Even when it's a bit dark.
Now I understand why your prose is full of poetry. You found poetry there.
Yes. I found poetry there, and some of the poetry actually comes from some of the words, and that's why I picked up a few words that I was very drawn to, and they became mini stories in the book. Because for me they are words that are the opposite of a border. They unite people. They're pan-Balkan words. You know, there is Chishma, and there is Zmei.
Chishma.
Chishma.
In Romanian.
I know, that's why I said it. And you also have Zmei.
Yes.
And many other words which, you know, are either from Slavic or from Arabic or from Greek, which have survived these terrible borders that have divided us and brought us so much pain and death and confusion.
What was it for you to see the refugees crossing the border, women and children and men who still had the wounds of war on their bodies?
Well, I mean, it's apocalyptic. It's kind of it's also very strange, you know, to see these old routes of smuggling routes, really, the old migration routes, being used again. And some of the local people, the people of the border, you know, remember their grandparents around everything. And now they're seeing these people coming from, you know, the Middle East. This is a few years ago, with nothing. And people had mixed responses to this. You know, a whole spectrum from shutting the door, I don't want to see this, you know, I don't want to see this, it's too much for me, I'll just pretend it's not happening, to people who would go and share everything they had with the refugees. And there are some, yeah, amazing situations which I describe in the book. But it was certainly a kind of, there were so many lessons for me in this. It was very humbling.
A lot of your encounters are rather magical. Why were you interested in that?
Oh yes, I'm interested in everything when I'm in a place. Yes, the firewalking. I wasn't specifically interested in the firewalking, but it's there. So I became interested in it. And that is the meaning of being fully present in a place. You you walk into it. I'm just looking at these frames, you know. They're waiting for a story there, or for an image. It's like that. You walk through the frame, you know, and there you are, and everything is happening simultaneously, just like in fairy tales. not because it's a fairy tale, maybe a very dark one, but because life actually is like that. It happens simultaneously. You know, in one day spent in the village in the valley, it's one of the places in the book. In one day I met an old man who used to be in the border army, who had killed at least 3 people, fugitives, but also one of his own, you know, colleagues, just shot them because they were trying to cross the border. You know, he's a killer, a seasoned killer, but his life was tragic. His son was killed as well in an accident. All of the men were in the border army, you know. Literally, they had the barbed wire, you know, barbed wire in the heart. And I spent the afternoon with this man, and in the same day I saw, you know, the old oaks of Stranja. Who knows how old they are. And I saw the firewalking ritual, which is nothing mystical. It's an old nature worship kind of ritual. It's about fire in May, fire, the sun element. You know, these are old sort
Did you
of
try
things. I didn't try it. I'm not that crazy. But it was interesting to see it, because obviously if you go on coals you will get burned. And the people who do it seem to go into a kind of trance. Where they don't feel the pain, they feel rapture. And I am very interested in mystical experience, you know, and states of rapture.
Most of your stories are just painful. Some of them haunt me, and I just read it in a book. There is one in particular that stayed with me. The young shepherd, who is another one, across the border on a hill, and he raises his hand and salutes him. And then he is arrested for doing this simple human gesture. How do you cope with the burden of so much pain that you have absorbed?
Yeah, well, I wasn't prepared at the time. I just wasn't prepared. So I think after the book, I actually got quite ill for a year, and I think that's why, because I absorbed it, and then I kind of I think I learned. I think I still absorb everything. It's in my nature. It's, you know, it's the price in a way, but. You know, a few years later now, perhaps I have now learned that even though you feel the pain deeply, you feel everybody's pain, it's impossible not to feel the pain that exists in the world, even if it's not personal. We feel it, you know, it's in the air. And that's where we are at the moment, you know, as a species. That's where we are. We have to work with it. And actually, if I hadn't experienced all of this, I wouldn't have been able to write the next 3 books of this quartet. The 3rd book is called Elixir, and it's about pain and healing. Not my own specifically, but I spend time in that journey with people who are healers, or people who heal themselves. Plants are the big subject there, but it's also about spiritual healing and psychological healing, and somehow going beyond this terrible pain that we can't avoid. We can't avoid it. We just have to, you know, we have to work with it like the alchemists, and that's why the book is Elixir, because it's an alchemical journey. And the alchemists, in psychology as well, there is the idea of alchemical psychology. It's transformative psychology. You work with the shadow. And this is also true of collectives and families and nations. We need to work with our shadow so that we're not trapped in it, so that we're not prisoners of the underworld, you know, so that we can actually emerge into the light. But first we need to work with it. And I suppose that is the gold of alchemy, you know, seeing ourselves for what we truly are. It's not what we think we are. it's far greater, you know. And I think this journey was the beginning of my realization that that I need to keep going back to the source.
I think this is the most highly acclaimed of your books. It was translated worldwide. It was awarded a Royal British Academy Prize. Did you expect the success?
No. No. Well, I mean, I was just pleased that I was able to create this. And the same happened with the subsequent 3 books. Because it's because I put everything into it, and because I am changed. And when you are deeply changed, you know, by an experience, you learn not to expect anything. You don't expect anything. You are just grateful. You're grateful, you know. Actually, the overwhelming feeling I had after this book, during and after, was gratitude. You know, I was just grateful to these people I met on the way, for what they gave of themselves. I couldn't have done it. I mean, yeah, just deep gratitude for being there, for still being there in this ravaged border zone.
Thank you, Kapka. It was a lovely talk. And thank you for your beautiful writing.
Thank you very much. Thank you.